All right, let's dive right in. Today, we are talking about a machine that didn't just tweak the world, it completely rewired it. I'm talking about the printing press. It's an incredible story about how one invention completely changed the way we share ideas, build societies, and even think.
To really get why this was such a big deal, you just have to look at the numbers. On the left, that's the absolute best a human being could do. A really skilled scribe, on a good day, might crank out 40 pages. Now look at the right. That's what one of Gutenberg's presses could do. That's not just an improvement, that's a whole different reality. This one comparison tells you everything you need to know about the revolution that was about to unfold.
So what was that world actually like? Well, before the mid-1400s, books were basically treasure. Every single one had to be copied by hand, word for word, a process that could take months, sometimes years. This made them unbelievably rare and so expensive that only the church or the super wealthy could even dream of owning one. Knowledge wasn't free. It was literally under lock and key.
But, things were starting to change. In the late Middle Ages, you had universities popping up, and a new middle class of merchants and craftsmen who were actually learning to read, and they were hungry for knowledge, for books. This created a massive bottleneck. The demand for information was exploding, but the supply, which was limited by how fast a person could write, just couldn't keep up. The stage was set for a breakthrough.
And that's where Johannes Gutenberg steps onto the scene. Now, the key thing to understand about him is that he didn't just invent printing out of thin air. His real genius was taking a bunch of existing technologies and combining them with his own brilliant innovations to create one single, incredibly efficient system. He was the ultimate tinkerer, the guy who put all the puzzle pieces together.
So let's break down his recipe for revolution. You can really think of it as 4 key ingredients that had to work together perfectly. Each one was a critical piece, and when you put them all together, you got a machine that could churn out text on a scale nobody had ever imagined. First up, the absolute heart of the system, movable type. And this is where Gutenberg's day job as a goldsmith was so important. He knew his way around metals. He cooked up this special alloy that was tough enough to be pressed thousands of times, but soft enough to be cast with precision. And his real stroke of genius? The hand mold. It was a little device that let him mass-produce identical letters super fast.
And Gutenberg had a huge kind of secret advantage here, the Latin alphabet. Think about it. Unlike writing systems with thousands of characters, he only had to perfect molds for about 24 letters, plus some punctuation. This made the whole movable type idea incredibly practical and efficient in Europe.
All right, ingredient number 2, the press itself. Again, he didn't invent this from scratch. He looked at the screw presses that people had been using for centuries to make wine and olive oil and thought, hey, I can use that. He tweaked it so it applied a nice, even pressure, and he added a sliding table so you could quickly pull out a printed sheet and slide a new one in. Simple, but it made the workflow so much faster. So the final pieces of the puzzle were the ink and the paper. The ink scribes used was water-based, and it just wouldn't stick to metal type. So Gutenberg had to invent a whole new ink, one that was thick and oil-based, kind of like a varnish, so it would cling perfectly to the metal letters. You combine that with the fact that cheap, mass-produced paper was just becoming available and bam, the recipe was complete.
With all the pieces in place, the effect was like lighting a match to gasoline. It was the world's first true information explosion. For the very first time in human history, ideas could go viral.
And the spread was just unbelievably fast. This technology did not stay put in Gutenberg's workshop. Within just a few decades, by the year 1500, there were printing presses humming away in about 270 different cities all across Europe.
And what were all those presses printing? It's estimated that in that short time, they produced over 20 million books. To put that in perspective, that's more books than had been created by hand in the 1,000 years before that.
But that was just the opening act. In the next 100 years, the 1500s, that number jumped by a factor of 10. We're talking an estimated 200 million copies. The floodgates of information weren't just open, they had been completely blown off their hinges.
So what happens when you suddenly flood a society with that much information? Well, it doesn't just mean more libraries. This wave of printed material started to remake the very fabric of society, from the church to the laboratory to how we even think about countries.
Let's start with religion. The press shattered the church's control over religious texts and ideas. The Protestant Reformation really was a media revolution. Martin Luther's 95 Theses went viral because they could be printed and distributed. I mean, look at that number, 300,000 copies of his writings in just 2 years. That kind of reach was just unimaginable a generation before. And in science, the same thing happened. All of a sudden, scientists in Poland could read about discoveries made in Italy almost instantly. They could share data, they could check each other's work, they could build on each other's theories. It created this continent-wide conversation that massively accelerated the scientific revolution.
This is a cool one. Print actually helped create the modern idea of nations. See, as printers started publishing books in local languages, French, German, English, they helped to standardize those languages. People who were reading the same books in the same language started to feel a sense of shared culture and identity, which was a huge step toward modern nationalism.
And maybe the most profound change of all, it democratized knowledge. As books got cheaper and easier to find, literacy rates shot up. For the first time, all the wisdom of the ancient Greeks and Romans and all the newest scientific ideas weren't just for a tiny elite. The rising middle class could finally get in on the action, and that changed everything.
Now, Gutenberg's invention wasn't the end of the story. Far from it. It was just the beginning. In fact, his basic design was so good that it stayed pretty much the same for over 300 years, until the Industrial Revolution came along and kicked everything into overdrive.
And you can see that acceleration right here. It starts slow, a few steady improvements, but then you hit steam power and the speed just explodes. This is what made mass media possible. Newspapers, magazines, cheap paperbacks, it all leads in a straight line from Gutenberg's workshop right to the digital world we live in today.
But here's a fascinating twist. Not everybody was throwing a party. Check out this quote. This is a powerful abbot, Johannes Gutenberg, and he was worried. He thought printing would make scholars lazy, that paper books were flimsy compared to sturdy parchment, and that it would mess up sacred traditions. Sound familiar? And that really brings us right up to today, doesn't it? From the printing press to the internet to AI, every single time we invent a new way to share information, it's met with this mix of wild excitement and deep anxiety. Which leaves us with a pretty big question to think about. As we navigate our own massive information explosion, what are we afraid of losing? And what incredible things might we be about to gain?